It's a peppy little tune, right? Gets the blood flowing. Conrad, welcome to Work Life. I'm really glad you're here today.
Eric, it's a pleasure. I'm so happy to be here.
Now, I'm looking forward to a conversation. It's one of the things that I love about this platform. It gives us the ability to connect over great distances. We are not actually at a very great distance. You and I are both located in the wonderful state of Florida. So how did you find your way to Florida? Have you always been here? Lifelong resident?
I have been born and raised here since from basically I was born and raised in Coral Gables, Miami, and then found my way only leaving here when I was 18 to go study up north. I since found my way back, and the pandemic has kept me here since.
Boy, I tell you, the last year, obviously crazy. First part of this year, a little bit crazy, but starting to feel the itch now. You can really feel with the vaccines getting in people's arms and, the sun shining, spring is here. You can really feel that maybe a change is in the air. You feel that down there as well?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Florida itself has always been, especially during this state of the pandemia, kind of keeping to its own jive. But at the very least, yeah, I think people are able to feel a little bit more comfortable about the situation and what they're able to do and what risks they're willing to take. And it's becoming life as we've come to know it in the past. I'll bet with a couple of new conditions, but hey.
Yeah, right. Pandemia. I like that. I haven't heard that before. I like that. That makes it sound much more positive. Hey, as we get started today, I'd love it if you could just walk us through a little bit about, you and your career. So where did you start out? What did you want to be when you decided not to be an astronaut, firefighter, police officer, the usual suspects, and sort of where did you end up today?
Yeah. I'll share my original expectation from a career standpoint. I went to study biomedical engineering with the premise that I was going to be growing kidneys in the lab. It was a very particular endeavor due to my own personal health situation. When I was 17, I found out I only had one kidney and multiple cysts. And it was kind of a call to action. It's bittersweet. I mean, it's an interesting experience to be invited to do something when your own body is kind of giving you the prompt to solve it. But at the same time, it turned out to not be the path I went down. I found myself really enraptured with biology, but more so from the kind of humanistic experience, not necessarily just am I sort of a human plumber, if you will. And what I ended up doing was I ended up taking that path of biomedical engineering and actually went down the entrepreneurial side. I was exploring from a very commercial standpoint what I could do with wound healing proteins that I had been playing with in the labs throughout my years in undergrad, and then through another year in grad school. And ultimately what I found myself doing was just continuing going down the startup path. I never actually explored taking on an employee type job until a couple of years into having failed miserably in the startup space, which is, call it a rite of passage, I think, at this point.
I think it is a rite of passage. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah. So the long and short from there is that during my time in the entrepreneurial world, I found myself surrounded by folks who, by their nature of being founders, by their nature of being visionaries, they really pressed themselves for time and tasks to try to become to try to engage as the very ambitious parties that they were. And the totality of that result in terms of their health, their personal sense of freedom and kind of being able to manage expectations, that kind of became a whole new call to action for me.
It's really interesting. There aren't too many people that I've had the chance to interview that really started out right on that entrepreneurial path, really started to develop something from day one. Usually they went down a path and decided they didn't like it and maybe got some experience out in the corporate world and said, I can do this better on my own, or I've got an idea. But it's exciting to hear about that, even though the circumstances sound like they were rough, with you and your health and trying to get into that path. What have you learned since you've been an entrepreneur, other than the few bumps early on?
Yeah. So my favorite lesson is about expectations, really more than anything else. I think what's really amazing to be aware of is what you set an expectation for when you first decide you're going to be an entrepreneur. And then as you go through the journey of that experience, really understanding what that expectation should evolve into. and what you should understand about your time, what you should understand about the task that you're trying to unfold, what you need to learn, what is it to know, what is it to be ignorant about the things you don't even know yet. And then once you know them, how do you kind of conform that into your time to be respectful of what it's going to take to succeed? I think that's one of my favorite lessons. It sometimes hits you like a sack of bricks. It sometimes make you feel like the biggest idiot in the world. But once you come to terms with you being even more of an idiot before you knew, that's your sort of your true moment of saying, oh, I'm actually a little bit smarter now. I'm not necessarily so incompetent. I'm just coming to terms with what I'm now coming to know.
That's interesting, because I hadn't really thought about it in quite that way before, because I think in our personal lives, right, expectations are a challenge, right? Expectations can lead to a lot of disappointment. There's been so much written about living in the here and now, but as a business owner, you've got financial reports that you have to do, payrolls to meet, there are
you have to live in the future a little bit.
Yeah, you do. You really have to look forward. So how do you sort of balance that out?
So there's certainly, and I'll say this from both a physiological standpoint down to the professional as well. On the physiology side, like personally speaking, you do have to learn how to manage the stress of what is not yet there. And I think when you're a visionary, or even if you're just a manager and you're very logical, you still have to hold yourself into the grounding of, as you say, the present, the now. Here's what I can do today. Here's what makes sense to do right this moment. And you can create a peace of mind structure within yourself around just performing what that is, because you've been able to, and this is kind of going to the more professional side, you've been able to set expectations that you understand are not necessarily, written in stone. They're not prophesized. They're not must be. They're goals that help you align with your direction. And then to that end of the future, you're able to kind of justify that what you're doing now makes the most sense to the knowledge you have today. And that's something that you should be able to give yourself humility for, in case tomorrow comes around and suddenly an entirely new perspective hits you. If you've set yourself upon the right path in the present, you're still performing, or at least finishing the experiment, if you will, of what you need to do right now to see some kind of results to then reflect back on. And at the same time, you have this sort of newfound awareness of like, okay, with this new information, I can adapt to this, or I can change this. I can still perform the experiment, or I can decide with conscientious peace that I could abandon this experiment and move on to a new set of operations for my time. Speaking like this, I know is a lot of, oh, it sounds great on paper, but like, how do I actually handle the kind of the sense of that? Honestly, just sitting down and not toiling away at the seconds, but really thinking over the corresponding hours of your time and thinking, okay, I've got leverage here. That's what matters.
So today, I think we stopped a little short of fully explaining to the audience what it is you do today. So share, what that is, and is that meeting you where you are? Has it fulfilled your expectations of where you wanted to be at this point in the business or in life?
So no, it hasn't. I'm a time manager. I specifically operate as a consultant and coach for business professionals. And specifically what I do is I analyze all 24 hours of their day, looking at all their personal expectations, their professional expectations, and making sense for them with them. How are they going to fit it all? How are they going to meet all of this in their time?
Yep.
For me right now, my expectation, which is still yet unmet, is I'm still quite voracious about how much I really want to learn about someone else's time in order to really just step in and start to help them. And not only do I do that, but I also want to kind of track, okay, here's the before, here's what happens when we intervene, and here's what happens after. As much as I'm able to do that very manually, my obsession is to really bring that down to a programmatic level, to kind of put it in practical terms. If you have a calendar right now in your world, which you probably do, where you set expectations for your day, I want a calendar that looks just like that one, just like Google Cal, that creates calendar blocks that shows you what you were actually up to. I want to be able to see those two calendars side by side, and I want to make suggestions based on the perspective of your reality versus the actual reality that you're living, and have that conversation with you. So
especially in this past year, you might not want to see what that looks like for a lot of people.
But
right?
You'd be surprised.
Yeah?
I really, to me, there's no shame, there's no guilt, there's no harm in given that you put a good contract together with who you're sharing information with, because privacy is key, but also responsibility is key with data. but I really don't care how ugly the time looks. I can share with you my own calendar, and you can see moments or days where things are clearly not great. And the perspective of that is supposed to help you grow, not to make you feel worse.
Hmm.
A lot of people hide away from those really awful days without taking the step back to really learn from it. And I think the more we show up to ourselves and the more we don't hide from ourselves, the better off we're going to be the next day.
So maybe it's too easy to stereotype, but when people come knocking on your door asking for your help, is it because they're overcommitted or undercommitted? Or is it a pretty fair split?
It can be either or. I would say more folks reach out to me because of overcommitment. Chances are they don't have the time anymore to look at the time. And that's kind of their challenge. Those who are undercommitted are more so going through a transition process. And the lack of discipline through not being overcommitted or even optimally committed is causing them to wonder where the hell they need to put their time. And so they're in this kind of state of flux where they actually feel anxiety from not doing enough. So we then correspond to meet those expectations by recognizing how they're going to actually discipline themselves into enough.
You know, American society as a whole is known for being a little bit an overworking society, right? We don't take very long breaks. Many people get 2 weeks of vacation a year, 3 weeks, something like that. Compare ourselves to European countries where it seems like they take the entire summer off. There are problems with work-life balance. Obviously, one of the reasons that I started this show is because I'm very passionate about work life and finding that balance to get that fulfillment in your life. But do you see that when you start looking at those calendars and evaluating what people are doing, that there just isn't a sense of balance?
Yes. And I will say, Eric, number one, super grateful that you're able to put up this kind of conversation, because I think this is not something that people feel like it's worth the time talking about, which is a very strange paradox in my world. To that end, I think to the term of balance, I've almost tried to look for another word to kind of complement with that, which is harmony. And really trying to say, is the time that you're spending resting giving you enough energy to come back to work, given your expectations of work? And to answer your question, the balance is not there for the most part. It's strange, but we've created through tradition as much as overly ambitious and unanalyzed expectations that we need to work 5 days a week from 9 to 5 and sort of meet this expectation of time quota without realizing an expectation of outcome or process or results quota, which some companies have done a fantastic job of, don't get me wrong, but not everyone has made that kind of perspective shift that they need to do in order to really understand what's worth doing when for how long.
It's so interesting that you talk about it so in such quantitative terms. We've got a 40-hour work week, right? We work 5 days a week, and it's big news when somebody comes back and says, oh, this company is dropping down to a 30-hour work week, or they're being more flexible with their workers and you're only required to be in the office 4 days a week. But then COVID came along, and all of a sudden everything went out the window. Now everybody is forced to, or many people are forced to work from home. You've got kids running around. You've got a lot of disruptions to what were some pretty set in stone routines that literally could be generational, right? People have been doing these things for a long time. Do you think by and large it's been good, or many people just haven't figured out how to adapt yet?
It's bittersweet. I'll say, on the pro side, the lack of travel, the ability to, given that you're able to manage expectations at home in terms of designing your environment so that you can have work at peace and you can have life at peace, and they can kind of cohabitate within the same space. I got that not everyone's living situation allows for that. Not everyone's family structure at this time allows for that. And it's not just whether or not you have kids, but whether or not you're homeschooling your kids versus they're going through virtual school, which I understand for them is a huge pain in the butt. I heard with too many clients, too many networking contacts, like I can't even keep my kids sitting down. And trying to meet all those expectations is certainly a nightmare. That's kind of the bitter end of where we are at with pandemia. And sometimes the answer is just, you just have to kind of keep tweaking it out and figuring out and making sure, and kind of looking for the little tricks that works. But sometimes there is just a heavier compromise that needs to be made, and it's not going to be easy. It may require a much bigger transition than you may desire. I will say that it again, in kind of summary, it is challenging for some, really challenging for others. And for the select few, they're very fortunate because it hasn't impacted them at all. In fact, it may have done them justice.
Now, there'll be no judgment here, but as we, transition to talking a little bit about what you do in your spare time, it's got to be awesome, right? Because you've managed your day to such an extent that now you've got this great ability to have a thriving personal life. What is it that brings you joy when you sort of shut the laptop and decide, now I'm just going to relax and be myself?
Yeah. So funny enough, I don't always shut off the laptop for my personal time. Again, there's just so much exciting stuff going on online, and I think there's so much to the world that can be happening. On a very, very personal note, sometimes I'll play digital board games with members of my close family and friends who are either all the way on the other side of the planet. And again, that's kind of playing to that sense of like, even though we're all stuck indoors, we can still have fun with each other. Living in Florida, no less, brings about the opportunity to go to the beach, to hang out outside, to catch in some sun. I did rock climbing for a number of months in the pandemic end. And then now, as we're transitioning over, I've been actually going back to my high school to play water polo with some of the kids and kind of reconnecting with my coach and kind of helping him out in that kind of light. So other than that, Isaac the cat, who has decided to veer away from the camera during this time of the call, he's very demanding, and there's a lot of fun to be had with him. Finally, there's just time with family to the best extent that I can provide that. My father is 94 years old as of this point, and every minute counts.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I've found when I do these interviews and talk to people about, them finding balance between their professional lives and their personal lives. There's almost always an element of getting out of your surroundings. For most people, it's getting outdoors in some way. You talked about going to the beach. I love to go on hikes or things like that. What do you think it is about nature, about getting outside, that just really provides that balance? I love the word harmony that you used before. I don't think there's anything as harmonious as sort of being in a natural setting.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of physiology involved with it where our bodies are just more kind to being in environments that are so open, that have fresh air coming through. Call it, in this particular case of, let's say, the beach or hiking in the woods, you've got this natural ambiance of sound that can be very pleasing. There's so much involved. You're really, if you look at it like a drug dose, it's such a compendium of things that are being administered to you across the experience of your body. And so to kind of be enwrapped in all of that, contrast that with the situation of being stuck in front of a desk and kind of trying to meet expectations with what this world has to offer, which, don't get me wrong, it's great, can be entertaining, but it's very shallow at the surface still. So it doesn't necessarily meet the same expectations that nature has been able to do for so long. We may come a long way and get there at some point and, really recreate a virtual reality, but I think we'll still be tired of that and just find ourselves looking for silence.
You mentioned earlier some health challenges early in life. How does somebody deal with that and not let that become kind of a boat anchor on who they are and, how they look at life, how they look at, moving forward? I'm sure you run into people that, are suffer from one ailment or another, and you can just see how it weighs them down and sort of prevents them from growing and really living their life. How did you overcome that? And how do you see that in others and advice for them in overcoming that?
Yeah, it's a little out of my realm, but I do understand the value of ownership as much as perspective and mindset when it comes to these kinds of health situations. For me, with my kidney situation, it took me a while. It took me a number of years to kind of come to terms with what I had to set expectations for, how I had to go about treating it, how I had to continuously stay on top of it, and kind of act as if it's still there, because it's still there. It's still a present condition. It's still something I'm going to have to address in time. But granted, I didn't take a career with it, was one particular step that I took. So it's not that you necessarily have to use, some people try to turn this identity inspiration into their business, their life, their identity, and they kind of sell along with that. And I think that can be totally helpful. If you found a solution to your problem and you recognize that others have it, that could be an entrepreneurial endeavor. But for other people, it may not necessarily be the case. It could be that this is just the condition, you've managed to treat it, but the true value that you've like to create is something entirely different. And that's kind of your modicum of inspiration to say, like, I don't have to have this define what I can provide value for. And so there's two ways to kind of take it. You can either go with it and utilize it, or you can actually use it as kind of like your war piece, your nemesis, the thing that inspires you to do the thing that matters, because this is the thing that's going to come against you someday.
As I've talked to a number of people and sort of bringing this full circle, who have done coaching, done consulting, really helped people deal with things in their personal life over and over again, one of the comments that I hear back is they find so much fulfillment in helping their clients achieve specific results and seeing the transformation that happens when they can adopt new ways of thinking or change their behaviors. What is it for you? I mean, what do you take away from everything that you're investing into your business and then the outcomes that you see with your clients?
Yeah. Okay. So this is something that I
smiled when I asked you that, by the way.
This is huge for me. My entire company's name and our brand is built upon this concept, but to me, it's all about awareness. So from my initial experience down to working with someone all to the very end, the more aware I become about a person, the more I understand about where their situation is like, what problems they're facing, how do I go about solving them, the more they come to understand themselves in that same light. To me, that stage of going from ignorant or unaware, if you will, to aware, so recognizing the problem and becoming flustered with it, becoming angry with it, like recognizing it, tackling it, failing at it, and then becoming well aware, actually knowing what to do about this situation, actually knowing how to incorporate it into your life, to make it accounted for, and then to be able to go on and move forward and take on the next problem or trade for a better problem. That to me is just such a fantastic experience. And I get as much out of it as the client does. So maybe I'm a little bit greedy in that sense.
No, I think it's neat because, I like this idea of just really understanding and getting to know people. I think it's very easy sometimes to look at people's problems just at the surface and say, well, if you did this and you did this, then everything would be fine. But many times these things aren't really at the surface, right? There's much deeper. The roots are deeper than that. There's other things that are going on that are contributing factors. So I love this idea of getting to really know and understand your clients, and then obviously seeing successes at the end of that journey and seeing a smile on their face, right, as you really help them through the problems. And then if you're lucky enough to get referrals from that client, what a great feeling is that, right?
Means I got someone to recognize something of value.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Like, that to me is an art in itself. And if you're one to produce it and someone else recognizes you for that, that's an incredibly validating piece.
And so where do you personally like to find your inspiration? Are you a podcast listener? Do you love to read books or watch videos, all of the above? I mean, where do you get your inspiration ideas on ways that you can better help people?
Yeah, so books have been obviously a huge resource. Online, certain content creators have done, I think, a fantastic job of distilling even the most simple content to just kind of get your head sparked into a new direction. I think when I really kind of boil back to it and kind of analyze it, a lot of the shorter form content these days, I'll be maybe a little bit strange by saying TikTok has been fantastic for me.
Yeah,
because some people just know how to take a minute of your time and just completely whip you on your head in terms of what you take away from that. As long as you have the prowess to kind of take whatever content, whether it's the book or the video or the podcast, stop, capture that information, put it down somewhere, set aside time to actually go and act that kind of principle or whatever was shared there. That to me is where my inspiration comes from. If I keep scrolling, either I'm not satisfied or I don't know what I'm looking for. And that's a different thing to kind of concern myself with in terms of time.
But it sounds like you're a little bit more visual. You enjoy visual content over spoken content, podcasts or audiobooks or things like that.
I will think that from an audio perspective, I miss out on sitting. I miss out on stopping to think, because I want to listen to what the person has to say next. And a lot of the conversation tends to be continual. There isn't necessarily, in few podcasts I've seen, there's moments where they kind of request a call to pause and think. And I understand that because the content's designed to keep going. Video content can be the same, but it helps when it's designed to be very short. So the start of the story and the end of the story is all right there. A book similarly has chapters. You can kind of pause between each chapter, and you get to choose when you want to stop to read and kind of place a bookmark down based on something that's kind of enticing you to go search more into it for your own sake. So yeah, I would probably, to your point, I'm definitely a little bit of a visual person, but I think it depends on how you consume the media.
Any plans in your future to create your own media?
So I do have the Well Aware podcast. I do produce a bit of content on LinkedIn, albeit I want to do more, and I'm actually bringing on some parties to actually help me go about doing that. I realize it's a lot of time to create content. So power to you, Eric, for all that you're doing right now and all that I imagine you've done in the background just to get to this point. Everything from getting the introduction set up to the music, like, again, I think part of that experience is what really helps put all this information together in such a cohesive way. So yeah, in time, the podcast will continue to grow. There's certainly more content to expect from me on LinkedIn. Hopefully I'll be getting my butt onto TikTok a little bit more as well.
Well, that's one of the challenges, right? There are so many places that you can be. We've talked on this show and others about, Clubhouse as a hot thing right now for audio chat and all the different social media channels. With the Well Aware podcast, what's your goal for the show? What information are you trying to bring out there?
Yeah, so I really like to highlight again on the context of awareness. So for me, what I realize is when I bring someone on to the Well Aware podcast, I'm really trying to ask them to highlight to other people that are listening in about things that they may not necessarily have known about that could transform the way they spend their time. And if they just come to understand what exactly that particular service is, or that particular set of actions, or this process, or this operation, that kind of information to me is huge. It's that enlightenment of knowing something you did not know before, and how to actually go about using that information right then and there to actually start incorporating it into your time.
Well, one of the beauties of podcasting, I think, is it's a medium that is growing like crazy. There are a lot of people who want to create content, and there are a lot of people who want to participate in the content. They want to be guests on shows. They want to consume the content. It's an exciting place to be right now. And, people like you and I are able to go out there and niche down, if you will, and talk about a very specific subject matter. And there may not be 10,000 people a week who download that episode to listen to it, but for the niche that you're serving, you can really add a lot of value. And that's one of the things that I really love about it.
I'm taking that note.
Conrad, as we wrap up here, I just want to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can find your podcast, where they can find you online, when they can learn more about the services that you offer. So we'll make sure to have all this linked up in the show notes as well. So if you would just tell the audience where they can find you.
Yeah, please. And thank you. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to just go on and search my name, Conrad Ruiz. If you want to check out more about Well Aware, please go to www.wellaware.me. From the main menu, you should be able to see things like the podcast, the blog, and a couple other things that are going on besides just the consulting that I provide.
No, that's awesome. And like I said, I'll make sure that we link up all that in the show notes. It's a fascinating conversation. I think you really have an interesting life story, and it's exciting to see that somebody like yourself has got this entrepreneurial gumption, if you will, to create, to serve others, to really help them, to bring that awareness. I just love what you're doing. So I was really glad to have you on the show today.
Eric, I'm super grateful. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you again.